Welcome to Mall UN with Chris. My name is Chris. I'll be your host for this. And here's my team. So in this video, we're going to go over the entire UN system and all the different committees that are within the UN body. Now, of course, there's hundreds and thousands of organizations within the UN, so I'm not going to be able to go over all of them in this video. You have online resources for that. However, I'll go over some of the main few so you have the basics, alright? So let's go over the General Assembly. That's the main body of the UN that has 193 member nations, a lot of observer states as well, and that's the main kind of functioning body of the UN. Its headquarters in New York, and in fact we actually have some delegates that tend to go on these trips from Churchill on the National High School Mall UN Conference. Here's a few quick pictures I'll splice in here. Alright, so there's actually 6 different committees that the GA kind of goes over, General Assembly GA, alright? So the first one is the first General Assembly, known as DISEC, Disarmament and International Security, alright? The second one is ECOFIN, which is Economic Financial. The third one is SOCM, Social Humanitarian. The fourth one is SPECPOL, Special Political. The fifth one is the Budget Committee. And the sixth one is the Legal Committee. So I'm going to discuss a little bit about each of these before moving on to discuss some of the other bodies of the UN. So DISEC talks about disarmament and international security. So we have a lot of things such as prisoners of war. We talk about emerging weapon systems. A lot of things like that. They deal with the Nuclear Proliferation Treaty. That's almost something that you want to have at all times. The United Nations Convention on Unconventional Arms, that's also something that you should have in your research binder if you're in DISEC, alright? Those are 2 very important documents. Again, that's the UN Convention on Unconventional Weapons and the Nuclear Arms Proliferation Treaty, alright? 2 documents that are really great for DISEC. Now the second committee that happens at U of C's annual HS1 conference a lot is ECOFIN, right? They tend to do this every year, and it's a committee that a lot of delegates don't really tend to like. Now, the reason for this is it has a strong focus on economics, a lot of financial things, a lot of delegates and students have a lot of trouble with economics. So it's a good idea to have a basic understanding of principles of economics, understanding how credits and debits work, alright? It's also important to understand basic economic schools of thought, such as Smith economics and Keynesian economics, both sides, understanding some ideologies, understanding some politics behind it, and that's a really a larger focus that you should be doing in your research if you're in ECOFIN, alright? You want to have a larger, broader grasp on what it is that your country stands for in terms of economic policies. Now here's the thing that we need to focus on. Throughout Mall UN, you don't actually really discuss things such as physical monetary values, right? We don't actually talk about money specifically. What we do is have the ability to talk about theories, alright? Technically speaking, the UN has a budget committee, which is the 5th General Assembly, I'll get to that takes care of the budget. We don't deal with the budget, alright? We're provided a budget for each committee and we spend that budget. For all intents and purposes, in most Mall UN conferences, we don't really worry about the cost. Anyone who brings up the cost is typically frowned upon. That's something that chairs should not be looking for whatsoever, even in an economic committee. It should be more about the economic policies and ideas and ways we're going to approach this rather than the actual physical numbers themselves. That's not what we're really focused on, so that's a danger that I'm going to caution you for ECOFIN, alright? Let's move on to the 3rd General Assembly, which is SOCM, Social Humanitarian. This is where we talk about things such as indigenous rights, refugee rights, a lot of other things, although there are refugee committees specifically as well. Social Humanitarian talks about a lot of other things, a lot of liberal ideas such as LGBTQ rights and other things like that. So this is a committee that a lot of students find a lot more collaboration working towards, as well as DISEC. I mean, a lot of people like to take away nuclear proliferation is a strong thing among many countries, as with a lot of these liberal rights, although some countries are a bit backward in that sense. But it does provide a lot of a good debate, and it helps students work with this. It really falls well with a lot of Canada's ideologies. So this is another great committee that a lot of students like. Not much to tell you here. It's pretty straightforward, I think, in terms of what you would look for yourself. As always, look towards the Universal Declaration of Human Rights by the UN. Alright, next we also have the 4th General Assembly, which is special political. Now they deal with issues ranging from a lot of different topics, such as who owns certain space, who owns certain rights within the UN government system. They deal with a lot of the problems within the UN system itself, such as the Security Council reform, other things like that, right? That's another committee that you need to have a strong knowledge of the UN system, all right? You need to be able to understand a lot of the different things, the UN Charter specifically, and really get into the mindset of what the UN does, what they represent, what they stand for. That's really important when you try to figure out all the different issues within SPECPOL, all right? So the next committee is the 5th General Assembly, which is basically never simulated at UN conferences for obvious reasons. You just sit around all day throwing out random numbers talking about how you want to spend the money, which is something that a lot of students would definitely not enjoy, as well as it would definitely not be very progressive or fruitful in terms of what you learn from it. So the final General Assembly that's typically simulated is, or that actually even exists, is the Legal Committee, which is the 6th General Assembly. So the Legal Committee deals with a lot of international law, all right? They deal with things such as maritime law, they deal with things such as piracy, they deal with a lot of other things such as war conventions as well sometimes. It depends on the variety of topics, but essentially they deal with a lot of things that would correspond to the International Court of Justice and other parts of the UN that would technically be more legally binding, although it is confusing because then you also write resolutions as opposed to physical laws. However, it is the only committee within the UN body that can actually pass a legally binding document. Alright, so let's talk about some other parts of the UN system. There's the Security Council, which is probably the highest part of the highest body within the UN. They are the main providers of international security. You have the 5 permanent members, P5 nations, which is what we refer to all across the board as China, USA, United Kingdom, Russia, and France, 5 of the victors of World War II when the United Nations was created. And as such, they have a permanent seat on the Security Council. The other seats on the Security Council are based by region, and they sit in a circle and they discuss all these different issues, and they try to come to terms with global security, terrorism, other things like that. This is a crisis committee. It's typically simulated at the U of C every year. It's also simulated frequently at Churchill's Hall at UN. So this is a committee that I myself have a lot of experience in, and it is definitely one of the more challenging committees because things are very fast-paced. If you're interested in things such as crisis, where things are actually happening and you can actually take specific actions, such as maybe deploying peacekeeping troops or coming to stronger things, sending in actions rather than proposing solutions, perhaps crisis is for you. So we have another set of crisis videos for you if you're interested in that, and if you have the opportunity, very lucky opportunity to be able to participate in these crisis committees. So that's another thing that we have. Security Council made of 15 members. It's a very small committee, and it's a very great committee that has a lot of action and strong potential to actually do good things within the UN. They're probably the one body that gets the most things done, because really you can't waste time or go through red tape when talking about international security. Let's talk about a few more other bodies within the UN. We have the Unhcr, which is the High Commission on Refugees, and we also have the Unhcr, which is the Human Rights Council. So those obviously, with their names, deal with refugees and human rights. We have other bodies such as the World Food Agency. We have things such as UNESCO, which is the United Nations Economic, Social, Cultural Organization. We also have the UN OCD, which is the Office on Drugs, or ODC, sorry, Office on Drugs and Crime. We also have other the committees that aren't necessarily UN bodies that we typically like to simulate, such as the World Health Organization is a bit more of a specialized agency. We also have things such as NATO. Sometimes it's actually that is typically simulated. That's also typically a crisis committee. We have a lot of other bodies as well. We like to simulate a lot of different kind of board of directors, a lot of different businesses, a lot of other historical crises that like to show up a lot, such as some of the world wars, a lot of revolutions. Particularly this year when we're making these videos, we have the Chinese Civil War at Churchill. Just a lot of different things like that. And crisis committees, again, there's another video for that. It's a lot more fast-paced, a lot of different things that happen. So hopefully this kind of gives you an idea, a little bit, at least the intro of the General Assemblies, of how the UN works. This is something you should really understand, look up. You can probably read on it better than I can describe it to you, but that's a really quick rundown of all the different things within the UN. There's a lot more, there's thousands and thousands of committees. It's probably a good idea to also print that out and have that within your research binder so you can reference that in resolutions. And especially when you're talking to people in your speeches, it sounds that you know what you're talking about, but you can just throw out all these different committees. This is another thing that's also really important. You don't want to be creating committees. That's the number one thing that delegates like to do, especially beginner delegates, like to come up and say, well, I have a solution for this. Let's just make another committee to deal with this. The UN doesn't need another committee. There are thousands of these committees, all right? There's things that go from small things like hacking to things like food. You have everything in between. There's a lot of NGOs, non-governmental organizations, volunteer work, groups such as Oxfam, Red Cross, Doctors Without Borders, all those different types of organizations that the UN frequently works with. So you have to reference those as well. That would be a great way to actually put something into your resolutions, and instead of, well, the next time someone in your committee says, well, let's create another body or organization or committee to oversee this, well, you can say, well, actually there's already an organization that does that, so why when we implement it, it'd be faster, it'd be cheaper. That's the kind of thing that you'd like to say, alright? So, hope that helped. This is a quick oversight over the UN system and the General Assemblies. I'll see you in the next chapter.